Numidian was the name given by the Romans to a group of semi-nomadic tribes, ancestors of today's Berbers of North Africa. Their way of life was originally nomadic, and in fact, the word nomadic comes from their name. The Numidians occupied northern territories of the current countries of Morocco, Algeria, and Tunisia. These people have gone down in history mainly for providing a unique, reckless, and fearsome military unit, the Numidian Cavalry, considered the best cavalry of antiquity in the entire Mediterranean area. Similar to the nomadic Mongols that have survived to the present day, the Numidian way of life was intimately related to horses, constituting an extension of their body to such an extent that Livy says that they only knew how to fight on horseback and had no experience in combat on foot. In their daily life, they used the horse as a basic means for their continuous movement and for hunting, from where their military strategies seemed to come from. The Romans admired their way of riding. This is how Titus Livy speaks of them. Nothing less disturbing to the Romans at first sight. Tiny, frail horses and men, unbroken riders with no weapons other than the javelin they carry, horses without bridles, with movements even lacking elegance in their gallop, with stiff necks and heads stretched forward. They deliberately accentuated this unpresentable aspect by letting themselves fall off the horses and offering a ridiculous spectacle. And so the Romans, who at first had stood at their posts attentive and ready in case they were attacked, then took to watching, unarmed and seated for the most part. The Numidians approached at a gallop and then retreated, but little by little they came nearer and nearer to the camp, as if they were unable to control their mounts, and the latter carried them without their intending it. However, these small horses and riders, in the eyes of the Romans, caused them a great deal of trouble. Indeed, their equipment was quite simple. Let us see how they would prepare for battle. They tended to fight in tunics only, although they may have occasionally worn animal skins or light armor. They carried leather shields as their main element of protection, and several spears as an offensive weapon. With this meager equipment, they constituted the lightest and fastest cavalry known to the classical world. And that is what surprised the Romans most about them: their speed and the fact that they did not use saddles, bridles, or brakes. In fact, in Virgil's Aeneid, they are defined as the unbridled. The only accessory they used to control their horses was a rope or a stick, which made their excellent handling of their mounts even more striking. From about the 5th century BC, the Numidians, in addition to their own people, fought as mercenaries hired by their North African Carthaginian neighbors. These excellent horsemen had multiple uses. They could be used as scouts with reconnaissance and intelligence functions, as shock and rapid looting forces, or as elements of provocation that made the enemies leave their fort. In the battles themselves, their main function was to position themselves on the flanks of the infantry in order to secure the wings, to try to envelop the enemy or to engage in small skirmishes by breaking the ranks of the enemy army in formation, either with harassing attacks themselves or by provoking counterattacks by throwing the spears and feigning retreat. For example, at the Battle of Ticino during the Second Punic War, undoubtedly the moment of greatest historical importance of the Numidian cavalry, Hannibal placed the Numidians on both wings. Note that the horsemen of other origins who did use braces were placed in the center, and that while he had elephants, he also placed them in the center in a vanguard position with the infantry behind them. The Greek historian Polybius also describes his strategy as follows: the Romans had nothing to do against that enemy, for the Numidians retreated easily, dispersing, but turned and attacked again boldly and recklessly. They are accustomed to fight in this way. Livy highlights another unique ability of the Numidians as follows. Like the acrobats, they carried 2 horses and were accustomed to jump armed from the tired horse to the fresh one, often in the fiercest of fights. So great was their agility and the docility of the horses of that breed. The Numidian horsemen often fought without any predetermined formation, in a way more similar to a hunting party surrounding a large animal, and, at least in the eyes of the Romans, they completely lacked combat order. Sallust describes this chaos in detail during the clash between the Numidian cavalry and the Roman troops led by Quintus Caecilius Metellus during the Punic War in 109 BCE. Suddenly they gave the signal, and the cavalry rushes against the enemy. Some Numidians wreaked havoc on the rear, others tested the left and right flanks, showing themselves as if attacking and pressing, disrupting the Roman ranks at every point. Among them, even those who had faced the enemy with the firmest resolve were baffled by the confusion of battle. While the Romans were wounded from afar, they had no chance to retaliate or engage in close combat. When a Roman squadron began to pursue them, the Numidians retreated, not in close ranks or to the same spot, but as far apart from each other as possible. In this way, being superior in number, if they couldn't make the enemy abandon their pursuit, they attacked them with swords and on their flanks when they were demoralized. And if a hill was more suitable for retreat than the plains, the Numidian horses, being accustomed to it, made their way through with ease among the underbrush, while the Romans were hindered by the rugged and unfamiliar terrain. Moreover, the overall aspect of the battle was diverse, uncertain, horrible, and pitiful. Isolated from their comrades, some retreated, others advanced, paying no attention to the standards of formations. Wherever danger caught them, they stayed and tried to fend off the enemy. Offensive and defensive weapons, men and horses, enemies and compatriots were all mixed together. Nothing was done according to plan or command. Chance ruled everything. The first known battles of the Numidian horsemen, serving the Carthaginians, took place during the Carthaginian conquest of the Iberian Peninsula and the First Punic War. However, their most decisive actions would occur during the Second Punic War, which would determine the most powerful force in the Mediterranean world. In 218 BCE, the Romans suffered a major debacle in the Battle of Lake Trasimene, losing about 15,000 men, trapped between the Punic army and the lake. The Numidian horsemen played a fundamental role in pursuing the Romans who tried to flee. The following year, they participated in an even greater massacre, the Battle of Cannae, which ended with about 60,000 Roman deaths and left Rome completely exposed. After the disaster at Cannae, Rome was left without an army to defend it and with the enemy at its gates, to the point where they had to recruit legionnaires from boys under 16, slaves, and condemned criminals who could not be equipped without resorting to weapons looted in previous wars and stored in temples as offerings to the gods. At this pivotal moment that could have changed the course of history, the Numidian horsemen were decisive. With Hannibal only 3 miles from the Eternal City, 1,200 Numidian cavalrymen, betraying Hannibal, switched to the Latin side and crossed the center of Rome itself to defend it, causing many Romans to believe they had been invaded and to throw stones at them from windows. Ultimately, Hannibal lacked the courage or the opportunity to take Rome, and the war shifted to Africa. Meanwhile, a conflict grew in Numidia between the leaders of its 2 main tribes, Syphax and Massinissa. Massinissa allied with the Romans, contributing 4,000 Numidian horsemen to the Latin side in the decisive Battle of Zama. The Carthaginians, who also had about 4,000 Numidian horsemen, were defeated. The Numidian kingdom would eventually become the cause of the Third Punic War, as it continued to seize Carthaginian lands, which the Carthaginians were prohibited from defending without Roman authorization, according to the peace treaty that ended the Second Punic War. The Numidian horsemen continued to be a highly valued auxiliary force for the Romans, fighting alongside them, for example, in the war against Viriathus in Lusitania. Clashes with them were not absent, as Rome faced them during the war against the Numidian king Jugurtha, and later in the Roman Civil War, where they fought on Pompey's side against Julius Caesar. That's it for today, but don't worry, we're just getting started. Thanks for joining this historical ride, and get ready for more fun facts and stories in the next video. See you soon, time travelers.